We'll at least have a quorum.
And then I don't know if you saw, there was some information submitted for 44 grant. There was a revised letter submitted yesterday that I forwarded on. I think it was this morning, but then there were several other emails that we got today. And so I forwarded all the information at right close to 5 o'clock, but I don't know who all will see it. So we'll have to maybe screen share and do some stuff.
Yeah, we'll have to figure that out.
Yeah, we can talk about how to handle that one when we get to it.
Yep. Hey, Tip.
Hi, how are you doing, Michelle and everybody?
Good to see you.
You guys too.
We're going to see the puppy.
Maybe. Today's his 7th month birthday.
Aw.
And he
That
got
puppy
all
is
gussied up yesterday at his spa day.
Oh.
We were thinking we might see you there, Carrie, but we didn't.
No, I wasn't there.
Let me see if I can. He's having his lamb pate dinner right now, so.
Oh, well.
But he's getting ready to.
Fancy.
Let me
I
see.
need a 7-month birthday.
Oh,
know, I
he's
do
so
too.
pretty.
Oh my gosh.
Isn't he
beautiful.
big?
Yes, he
Wow.
is.
Can you imagine we got him at 11.5 pounds and he weighs now something between 55 and 60.
It's amazing,
Wow.
isn't it?
I know, I
What?
can't believe it.
What's the breed
Is it-
standard on the males?
65 plus. And they achieve full growth at 14 months, but of course the curve is now going to start. You know, like for example, he's kind of moving more, we free feed him, but he's moving more toward a once a meal day thing. So his body and metabolism are sort of moving in that direction now.
Cool.
But we were hoping to see you, Carrie.
I was hoping to see him.
Really?
Just wanted to let you guys know that I have a text from our first applicant. He's having trouble getting in. Let's see. I'm going to go ahead and re-email him the link because he's having trouble.
Okay, so have you watched Lassie, Tip?
Of course I did.
Reruns of the classic?
Well, I haven't seen it recently, I have to say. Have you?
Well, I watched it when it was a first run show.
Yeah, me too. But I can't believe how many people, when we're walking him in Manitou, for example, you can't believe how many people stop and say like, oh, he's Lassie. Even young people. So it still resonates, I think.
Yeah.
Well, they're not a common dog, so that's what's fun to see.
It's true. But I will say, Carrie, that the response he gets, I think there might start to be more of them. He is quite the little fan club. And
You're
I
going to
really
get
like
kickbacks.
But it's really fun walking him in Manitou. Oh, did we tell you that he's now encountered 2 bears in Manitou?
Oh my gosh.
Yep.
Are they
How
up
did
by
that go?
Washington?
He protected us. They were both around the library, and one was on Manitou
Okay,
Avenue.
good.
Wow.
They can stay down there.
Yeah, right.
I
We
hear
had
there are
one
a
in our
lot on
backyard last week.
Lover's
Oh,
Lane has a lot,
huge.
I hear.
Oh yeah.
Was it a big one, Julia?
It was huge. I won't, but I want to forward the whole world this picture. I thought a cat was in the backyard.
Oh,
That happens here. He was huge.
wow.
And the dog didn't care. I know.
Well, the dog took one look and went, no.
Yeah. Lassie's on. I'm going back inside.
Well, it was funny.
Nacho's got it.
The first time Nacho saw it, it was about 11:30, and it was right across the street, and we were at the library, and Nacho started barking, and the bear started ambling away from us, and this guy comes out of his house, and we hear screaming, "Oh!" and then the F word, and then he turns around and runs back into his house. It was very funny.
It looks like Lynn is in the audience, the
Yeah.
first applicant.
We're ready to go, so,
Yep, I see him. I let him know I see him.
okay, so I will call this meeting to order. This is the October 14th meeting of the Manitou Springs Planning Commission, October 14th, 2020. And so the first item of business is approval of the minutes of the September 9th meeting. Is there a motion to approve?
Make a motion to approve the minutes of the September 9th meeting.
A second.
Okay, any discussion? And all in favor, raise your hand. Okay, well, that's unanimous. So moving on, we'll start our business meeting, and before we start, I'll describe the process for people in the audience. I'll call an item for consideration, and planning staff will describe what the request is and what their analysis is and findings and recommendations. Following that, we'll allow the applicant to speak. And following that, we'll open up the hearing to the public, and anybody in the public is entitled to state their opinion on this item, for, against, concerns, whatever. And as we go through it, we'll be guided by what's in our municipal code, specifically the planning and the zoning and subdivision ordinances. And we will be guided by what's in our code. Rather, we don't legislate, we just follow what's in the ordinances. So with that, are there any conflicts or ex parte contacts to disclose? Okay. So first item of business will be 515 El Paso Boulevard. Lynn Edinger Harwell, applicant on behalf of Sun Wellness Company's owner.
And actually, that's 514.
Oh, 514.
That's all right. That's
Oh,
right.
I thought you had just the number wrong.
We're just all messed up. The applicant is requesting a major conditional use permit to allow operation of a mobile food truck on the subject property, and you have information following the report. The application initially proposed installation of a food truck in the Sunwater parking lot. This application was received after the food truck operation began. The applicant was notified of the need for a major conditional use permit when he spoke with the planning staff following a meeting with the parking department. Staff and the applicant have worked together to try to find a temporary arrangement that would have allowed the truck to operate while this application was being processed. However, the scenarios that were pursued were not feasible, and the truck is now closed pending the outcome of this request. In regard to background, staff's gone into a lot of the background and actually also provided information about the parking variance that is on the agenda, but has been withdrawn. So I just wanted to kind of set the scenario of the work behind the scenes that staff and the applicant have done that resulted in some changes to the proposal. So redevelopment and construction of the existing building and property improvements for the Sunwater Spa was initially approved in 2012. At the time of major development approval, parking variance was also approved, and then subsequently when new floodplain maps were issued by FEMA, the ground floor of the new building was removed from the floodplain, and the property owner was able to utilize that area for a pool. So a revised parking variance, actually revised major development and parking variance were approved in 2014. Then in 2015, Sunwater added the adjacent property around the corner on Washington Avenue to their operations. That resulted in another revised parking variance. So that current variance they're operating under required a minimum of 5 private parking spaces provided on site, 11 public parking spaces provided on El Paso Boulevard along the property frontage. Sunwater, when it was developed, actually installed parking on that side of the street, the bump out or the bump ins, I guess you could call them. Before there were no parking, public parking along that property frontage. 14 private parking spaces provided under a lease agreement on the property at 10 Old Man's Trail, and a total of 30 spaces between reserved on-site and recognizing the new public spaces, a total of 30 parking spaces was required. Right now, dedicated on-site parking for Sunwater is 7 parking spaces, including a required ADA space. Initially, there was a parking variance proposed with this conditional use permit. The variance request asked for use of the parking spaces on the west side of the Sunwater lot for a temporary area comprised of a heated tent with tables and chairs for customers to wait for appointments. The spa is operating exclusively by appointment due to the COVID pandemic and the need for social distancing is pushing that waiting area request. The city has allowed other businesses to put in temporary waiting areas, similar kind of tent, heated tent kind of things, without requiring a variance or a formal approval process. So that's a current policy that we have. It's to help businesses for these temporary provisions that they need to make at least through the winter. So due to that current policy, staff determined the temporary waiting area for Sunwater, which is only intended to be in place for the winter, doesn't require a variance. And so that's why that variance was withdrawn. So once the evaluation of the waiting area was done, this left the food truck to be addressed. Currently, the truck is located in 3 parking spots on the east side of the Sunwater parking lot. The applicant didn't understand the use of those spaces also need to be included in the parking variance application, which it wasn't. Staff evaluated the food truck's use of Sunwater parking and had the following concerns. The food truck operation in the parking lot could create an unsafe situation with customers waiting for their orders and any use of the west side of the parking lot when the waiting area is not in place. And the lot, the lot is small, the vehicle movement area is narrow. Staff would be concerned with conflicts between vehicles and waiting food truck customers. In fact, when the truck was operating, staff pulled into the parking lot and was told by an employee to remove the vehicle, that we shouldn't park there. Staff questioned the feasibility of the food truck taking up basically half of the spa's only dedicated on-site parking, or potentially all of the on-site parking if customers couldn't safely use the remaining spaces on the west side of the lot. And the city parking department is in the process of proposing changes to the parking arrangements with Sunwater in the Hiawatha parking lot. The change is under negotiation, but once decided, will require a revision to the 2015 parking variance, which was specific to the leased parking arrangement in Hiawatha. The parking variance submitted with this conditional use application didn't account for that change. So Sunwater would have to submit another parking variance request in a few months based on whatever the final plan is for changes to the current leased parking arrangement. So in order to try to establish a complete accounting of parking arrangements, so potentially Sunwater wouldn't have to process 2 variances only a few months apart, staff consulted with the parking department about the proposed changes at Hiawatha. And then through that discussion, the concept of putting the food truck on the Hiawatha property was proposed. That was something that I had thought about. I asked the parking department if it was something that they thought might be acceptable. Parking department took a look at that idea and then let me know they supported moving the food truck to Hiawatha. That helps resolve staff's concerns regarding loss of dedicated Sunwater parking and potential pedestrian and vehicle conflicts in that parking lot at the 514 El Paso site, and having to request another parking variance in a short time frame because parking department could not tell me what the final provisions are going to be over at Hiawatha for parking with Sunwater. And this alternative location on Hiawatha puts the food truck in the middle of the highest level of activity in the area and provides a desirable amenity at Hiawatha. This should also cut down on the number of pedestrians crossing El Paso solely to get to the food truck at Sunwater. So I think has other safety benefits as well. Staff spoke with the applicant who agreed, they've agreed to this alternative. Therefore, the staff report in evaluation addresses the food truck being placed on the Hiawatha property, which is at 10 Old Man's Trail. Staff included the initial application information in order for the commission to have the operation details and things that aren't necessarily specific to the Sunwater property. But hopefully that's not too confusing if we just try to keep straight that what we're really talking about now is moving the operation to the Hiawatha property. The applicant indicated because of being shut down due to COVID and the need to reduce customer capacity to meet operations guidance, the spa business is in financial distress. So operation of the food truck is seen as an additional revenue stream that the applicant is confident means the difference of being minimally profitable, or maybe not profitable, but at least coming out even, and potential failure of the business. Because of the midstream change to the initial proposal and in an attempt to facilitate Sunwater's request and their hope the truck will be back in business as soon as possible, staff will post, advertise, and send out mailed notices specific for the Hiawatha property to inform the public about the city council hearing on the revised request. The applicant did perform the notice that he was required, the mailed notice, and the property, the Sunwater property, was posted and advertised. Since the Planning Commission recommends, because this is a major conditional use, the final actual public hearing will be at City Council, and so we'll provide sufficient notice. We'll post Hiawatha, we'll re-advertise for the hearing at City Council, and we will send letters out to both the people that were on the Hiawatha, I'm sorry, on the Sunwater list, and it'll probably add a few potential property owners because of the shift over to Hiawatha. We'll need to add some area around that property. So we want to make sure that our public notice is done sufficiently for the change of venue, basically. So according to the zoning code, there's a list of criteria that's required for major conditional use permits, and the City Council will have to determine that the criteria are met with the respect to the type of use, and that is what the Planning Commission is considering tonight, whether those criteria are met, and if the Planning Commission determines that a recommendation of approval is warranted. So in regard to the first criteria, that is in regard to the values and qualities of the neighborhood not being injured due to the request. Item A talks about the qualities and character of the community as set forth in the Manatee Springs Design Guidelines, which are applicable to the historic district. So the Hiawatha property is not currently located in the local district. There was a formal application to include that property. I think it's been about 2 years ago. Council didn't act on that. There are current discussions regarding whether or not to bring it into the district, just depending on what the council decides to do with the property. And so that could change. The food truck operation wouldn't result in any permanent changes to the exterior of the building. Therefore, if the property were restored to the district, there wouldn't be impacts on the historic qualities or character of the property or the surrounding area. Item B is the proposed use is incompatible with function and design with surrounding land uses. So zoning across El Paso to the north of 10 Old Man's Trail is downtown. The Sunwater Spa operates in that area and also around the corner on Washington, as I mentioned earlier. The city's government offices, police, and fire departments are west of the property at Manitou Avenue and El Paso Boulevard, basically across Memorial Park. There's general residential land use to the north and east of 10 Old Man's Trail. Memorial Park and 7 Minute Spring are also their zone park and are directly west and north of the Hiawatha property. There is commercial zoning on the properties to the south on Manitou Avenue, and land uses along Manitou Avenue are the Manitou Arts Center, the Manitou Springs Heritage Center Museum, and a public laundromat and large hotel. The Hiawatha property itself is zoned commercial and is being operated as a parking lot and is the city's transit hub. The area proposed for location of the food truck doesn't impact parking capacity. It's an area that where no parking spaces are currently located. The truck would be placed along the front of the building in the area where the garage door is located. And I included some pictures of the front of the Hiawatha property so that the commission members could reference that. The existing porta potties will be moved south near the currently unused building entrance. And, you know, the intention is not to put those right on top of the food truck, but to, you know, have a little bit of distance, but certainly having those right in the vicinity of the food truck also makes a lot of sense. And then the truck location will provide for safe vehicle and pedestrian movements. You might notice on at least one of those photos that there's a crosshatched area in front of the garage door. And certainly when the food truck would be pulled in parallel along the side of the building there in front of that door and you know, past it, you can see that there's area that can be outside of the drive aisle that where people will be able to stand and, you know, kind of look at where that crosshatched area is and how visualize how far that would come out. So there should be, I'm recommending installation of visual barriers, not so much barriers that would keep a car from pushing those, you know, something like a Jersey barrier, but certainly if those became available, they could be utilized. But then maybe something that is a little more attractive than just a plain Jersey barrier, some fencing, you know, lattice work or some planters or something to make it look a little nicer. I was even talking to the applicant today about if there were Jersey barriers put around, maybe they could have somebody paint them, you know, to go along with the food truck or that type of thing. So something a little more attractive than just plopping down some concrete Jersey barriers. And so there would be a defined area for a service and a waiting area. The applicant mentioned today that he would be providing garbage cans, you know, and regularly emptying those, taking over and putting in the Sunwater dumpster. And placing on the truck on this property will allow it to benefit from highest visitor activity, as I've noted, and provide an amenity to people waiting for the bus and visiting or returning from the downtown or the incline. It's actually something we've talked about in regard to eventual overall use of Hiawatha, is having some sort of type of food and beverage service. So this could be seen as a start, at least, to that. Item number 2 is in regard to the intent of the zoning code. Staff does find the proposal is consistent with the purpose and intent, and I've listed that information, provided that information in the staff report. Staff also notes the alternative location for the food truck preserves the only dedicated on-site parking for the Sunwater property, you know, which is only 7 parking spaces. So that's certainly not an excessive amount of parking for a business, and it's the only parking they truly control. So staff was very concerned about impacting that for their business. And as I've noted, staff feels this benefits the spa business by not taking up their basically most valuable parking. And it's safer for the public in regard to vehicle movements actually at the food truck, and reducing pedestrian traffic. For the short period that it was operating, it was getting pretty popular, and the applicant himself is a well-known local chef and is known to have, you know, good food, and I think that'll only build. And so, you know, their main market would be the people at the Hiawatha property, parking, walking into downtown, waiting for the bus, you know, that type of thing. And so this just kind of cuts out the need for people to cross El Paso, which has a lot of traffic with all of the activity of the parking and the transit. And the majority of the people that would be patronizing the food truck would be able to do it right on the Hiawatha property. So staff felt like that was also a benefit. In regard to the comprehensive plan, staff has noted the conditional use. There are some plan goals and policies that support the request in regard to economic development and also land use. I'm sure there were probably other ones that if somebody wanted to go through and try to pick out some more, but I think I've shown that there are policies that support this kind, maybe not specifically food trucks, but do support working with local businesses and supporting local businesses and a mix of land uses and that type of thing. Item number 3, conditional uses should not be allowed where there would be a nuisance or traffic congestion, threat to public health, safety, and welfare, or violation of any provision of the city's code. As noted previously, staff has had concerns regarding the safety of pedestrian and vehicle movements in the Sunwater lot. The proposed location at Hiawatha has more physical space for the food truck, and with physical barriers placed between the service area and the drive aisle, will be a safe location, much safer actually. The parking and food service will compatibly operate at this location on Hiawatha. The food truck's been inspected and permitted by the El Paso County Health Department. The applicant did submit copies of those for the file for the record to us today. And so I've looked at those and they're in place, and will be issued a Manitou Springs business license following any makeup approval by the city. The Public Facilities and Services Impact Report, as we've noted, this Public Facilities and Service Impact Report really is, it's hard to use it, especially in its entirety for these types of applications, but it does get to 2 or 3 items that are generally applicable. And so demonstration that the water supply and the sewer capacity is adequate. There's no impacts really substantially to the water system. We don't expect that this will at all impact the city's capacity, whether it's operating at Hiawatha or at another location. The same amount of water will be used, and they don't have a live water line, I guess you could say. It's, you know, the truck is filled up and then they use that water during the day, and then the gray water or the whatever gray, I guess it would be gray water, is emptied, and they go to the commissary, one of 2 commissary kitchens that they're approved for, one at the MAC and Manitou Arts Center, and one at one of the other Sunwater properties farther east on El Paso, and they have fully capable water and sewer systems. So there's no indication that this is going to be an issue. Demonstration the provisions for services such as traffic and police and fire and all that, all those kinds of services that the city provides. The parking department operates the Hiawatha lot and has recommended approval of the request. No issues or adverse comments have been received from either outside agencies or other city departments like water and sewer. They didn't note any kind of concerns or issues. The existing streets and other public services are adequate for operation of the food truck at this location, and the addition of this activity on this property is minor in scope compared to the other usage of the property in the surrounding area. It really is almost like a blip when you get right down to it, and frankly, they would serve a lot of existing visitors and traffic. There's going to probably be very little, minuscule, of somebody that's going to actually drive there just to go to the food truck. There's going to be a few, but statistically, I don't even know that you'd be able to have that show up in a statistical analysis. And so other items, 4 and 5, the property's already developed, so those items really aren't applicable. 6, again, the property's developed, and as noted, a barrier between the customer area and the vehicle drive aisle around the food truck will provide protection from traffic. And there's no construction or changes that would impact the design guidelines. Number 7, staff didn't require a traffic study. Again, it's due to the magnitude of the proposal, which uses area on the Hiawatha property on which parking doesn't currently exist, and their customer base will be visitors that are already going into that parking lot in that area. Demonstration that physical and visual barriers are minimized. No changes to existing pedestrian and vehicular circulation is proposed or anticipated. The food truck will be placed in an area where there is no parking and will not impede any drive aisles in the parking lot, and is in an area where pedestrians already frequent the porta potties. So those, and as I noted, those will be moved to the south, but will still be nearby. So there's already people walking back and forth into that area. And so the food truck will just be added to that area. I guess you could put it that way. Item 9, long-term effects and identification of alternatives. The city is in the process of determining how the Hiawatha property will be used long-term. In the interim, adding this activity and amenity to the property is seen as a benefit both to the applicant and to the city's transit and parking hub. Once the city determines how Hiawatha is going to be used or redeveloped, the food truck may or may not factor into that plan. However, by the time these decisions are made and any work actually begins, Sunwater's need for the additional food truck revenue or its business focus on this part of the operation may be less critical than it is currently. Staff notes, should construction occur that requires the food truck to move, which may or may not happen, the city would attempt to work with the food truck to find a temporary or permanent alternate location. If it's the kind of thing where we're doing some construction and they just need to move temporarily because we've decided it would be good to have them come back once the project's done, then it would just be a temporary relocation. Otherwise, who knows? There may be some food service that's brought into the building and some sort of, assistance with that. Item 10 is not applicable. Item 11, protection for wildlife hazards. The Hiawatha property is almost 100% covered in impervious area. And so there's no vegetation really that can be mitigated to reduce wildfire hazards. The applicant was not required to host a neighborhood meeting or seek public input outside of the mailed notification. The property was also posted and publication required per the zoning code. No other comments or any questions have been received from the public in regard to this notice. And as I noted, we'll be redoing the notice for the other, the Hiawatha property before it goes to City Council. So given that there's already a use arrangement for parking in the Hiawatha lot, the city and Sunwater have an existing relationship regarding some shared use of the property, and staff sees providing for the food truck in this location is an extension of that existing relationship. Staff recommends the Planning Commission find the proposal meets the requirements of the municipal code and forward a recommendation to City Council for approval of Major Conditional Use Permit 2003 for establishment of a food truck operation in front of the Hiawatha Gardens building at 10 Old Man's Trail, with the following conditions. Number 1, the legal arrangements for location of the food truck on city property shall be negotiated with the parking department and included in the current or revised parking arrangements or in a separate agreement prior to operation of the truck at the site. The agreement may include, but is not limited to, providing proof of insurance and listing the city as an additional insured, defining the operation area, determining if there will be any lease fee for the area utilized, documenting that the applicant will be responsible for payment of electricity used by operation of the food truck, and agreement on any improvements such as potential electrical outlets required for food truck operation. Number 2, visual and physical barriers shall be located to define the area of customer service and waiting along the edge of the drive aisles adjacent to the food truck operation. These barriers should be attractive and may include planters or movable fencing or screening. Simply placing traffic cones or other such devices is not acceptable. Planning and parking staff would have the final approval of barrier placement and design. 3, no permanent signage other than on the truck itself is allowed. A-frame signage, as allowed by the sign regulations, may be placed at the edge of service area. 4, approval is contingent upon the business owner meeting all applicable state and city and state regulations, including but not limited to the city's business license and compliance with sales tax collection and remittance. And as I've mentioned, you'll see the next couple of pages have some photos for your review. The letter from Sunwater, they also included a menu just to give you an idea of their food service. And then staff did a quick, we had a site plan for the Hiawatha property, and I've shown kind of with the little black dotted area where the food truck and porta potties would be relocated. And again, that's in an area that doesn't currently have parking. So that is the end of the staff report, and I am happy to answer any questions that I'm able to.
Any questions for staff? The tip?
Thank you so much, Michelle. I had a few questions. You've touched on them a little bit, but I wanted to have it, maybe put in the record a little bit more explicitly. Sure. Do we have examples either right now or in the past in Manitou, in past history of Manitou, where there were private businesses operating on city-owned land?
Well, that's a good question. We have not had an area in the past. I mean, there are businesses. Most of our city-owned land is parks, and so we have not had businesses operating in parks other than during special events like the Common Wheel and that type of thing. Hiawatha is a little different because it's not a park. It's more of a regular kind of business property that in fact had a restaurant there for many, many years. And so that's why, the thought arose, but we've really not had the kind of property that something like this would seem to make sense. And so no, there's not, a history of something similar. The Planning Commission has approved several major conditional use permits for food truck operation or, that kind of temporary structure kind of operation at a number of private properties along Manitou Avenue, but nothing up to this point at city-owned properties.
Okay, thank you so much. And who would be paying for the movement of the porta toilies, the toilets?
That's a good question. I don't know if it's something the city would do or if they'd have the porta potty company come in and do that. And certainly if there is a charge for that, they come, I would think that the applicant would need to pay that. They do come and service the porta potties at least once a week. And I know during the summer, we've been up to like 3 times a week. And it could be that during that operation that they would just agree to move them as part of that. But it's not something that we have yet worked out.
Tip, if I could, before we go into the next question, I wanted to jump back and address your question about, is there precedence for this? And Michelle answered it. I want to add to that in light of COVID, we have passed at the city council level with input from you guys, the ability for businesses to expand into city public right-of-ways, including Manitou Avenue. And so with that, that is what has really set the precedence for us to think that this was a reasonable option to move forward. In those scenarios, we are not charging those businesses to move into the sidewalk or into, if it's a parklet, that's what we're calling them, parklets. We're not charging them for those. So I just wanted to add that, because that is sort of a new aspect to what we're trying to do around economic development.
Thank you. And that's
Sure, you bet.
that's really helpful. And so then there's the the portable toilets. What about the barriers, the visual and whatever barriers? Who would be paying for those?
I would expect that the applicant would pay for those.
So in both the cases of the toilet and the barriers, that's not stipulated yet. We have expectations, but that has not been put into anything. That could be put into this, but we don't have that yet.
Right, right. And I was leaving a lot of those details, frankly, up to the parking department. They're going to need to negotiate. I don't know, what, if anything, they're going to want to charge, or, there could be a myriad of things of details that they want to include in an agreement. And so certainly you could include a condition that basically says, direct costs to the city would be covered by the applicant, and then leave it at that. Or you could just note that costs as determined appropriate by the parking department.
And I just have one more question, and that's that in terms of the fact that we don't know how things will be developed, I wanted to have a little bit more clarity about the extent to which we'd be committing ourselves. I appreciate that it's stipulated that if we pass this recommendation, that we would be helping the applicant move the property. But if, for example, the property was moving in the direction of having a greengrocer and a brew pub and then the transportation hub, and there wasn't a place for this, are we by if we approve this, would we be saying, kind of grandfathering them in and saying that they have a right to be there, which actually might prevent other avenues for the city to do things with that property?
No, I think much like the leased parking that we have the agreement for that, and I'm assuming it may even be the same agreement where they'll roll in this this approval with whatever their parking agreement ends up being, but that's an annual basis. There's provisions for cancellation, and it would need to be that same type of agreement. I think we would want to try and assist, looking around and seeing if there's a place that it would make sense on a temporary basis. But if the redevelopment of that property is such that it wouldn't make sense to have the truck there, then I think that's something that, they may come back and say, well, then we need to revisit having it, at Sunwater. Or, at that point they may say, we're going to do other things with it. We don't need to have it parked right anywhere right there. So, but no, the intent would not be that it's grandfathers some sort of permanent location.
Thank you so much.
Are you done, Tip? David?
Well, to be more specific, if the city decides to tear down the buildings at Hiawatha Gardens, would this prevent or delay that, or give Sunwater any sort of rights? And they're okay with that because they're, council's talking about that right now.
I mean, even if council made a decision tomorrow, it would be a while before that could reasonably happen, just finding the money and that type of thing. And no, I mean, like I said, it would be the same kind of annual lease agreement that has usually those cancellation provisions are 30 days, and that kind of thing. So I don't believe that the city would agree to something that basically gave a permanent location that then we would have to either find an acceptable alternative or, integrate the food truck in, no matter what the city's plans were. That's not the intent of this. And, you know, we would want to work with them because we support businesses, but it's not something where I know staff wouldn't support, and I don't believe city council would approve something ultimately that allowed that kind of control.
Well, it seems to me that it's basically a very good idea, and hopefully it can be done expeditiously and at minimal cost, because among other reasons, the future of the property is definitely up in the air.
Right.
Any other questions? Carrie?
Would the city, because we opened up to this food truck, even though it's kind of a tit for tat because of the parking, would it open us up to other businesses who say, hey, we want to have a food truck in the same location? Now you're doing food trucks there. We should allow you guys to, other people to do food trucks.
Sure. We actually talked about that, the parking department and myself. And, the fact is that other than this location right now, there's no place to put another food truck that would not take up parking. Everywhere else is is parking spaces. And so this is seen as an extension of the current lease agreement, and in addition to that, so there's already this established relationship, and they would not have to allow, the city would not have to allow other food trucks unless we wanted to, unless maybe that's ended up being part of the part of the future plan for the property. But it's not something the city would be required to do, because there really isn't any other place to put a truck that wouldn't impact parking.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Anything else? Okay, I have a few questions. I guess one of the things that concerns me is just the nature of a conditional use. I think these conditions are a little weak in terms of protecting the city. We have to have some way out. And what I read here is we're granting them forever the right to have a food truck on Hiawatha. And I don't think that's the intent, but I think when I read this, it's pretty weak, and I think we're going to have to tighten that up if we do this. And one of the things I'm curious about is like the power we need for this. Where's that going to come from?
The applicant's already in the process of looking at where the breaker panels are in Hiawatha. And we've talked about that, and he would be responsible for, they have two fairly large plugs, to plug the truck in, and something else for the operations. And so he understands they would be responsible for paying for the electrical work to provide those plugs if they're not already available. Because a restaurant operated in that building, they should have sufficient power going into the building. But the city doesn't really use the electrical right now. If somebody walks in and turns on a light, that's, minimal. And so he understands he would be responsible for the monthly bill, because his usage really would be the only usage at this point.
Yeah, my understanding is it would be like a 50 amp circuit. So if there
Right.
didn't happen to be one, they would pay whatever, new breaker box, whatever to do.
Whatever
that.
it takes, yeah, we're
Okay,
city
then
would not pay for that.
with that in mind, we just have to be very careful that if the truck is moved, because I mean, the area where we're proposing to put this truck, it's right where there's also suggestion of a significant amount of work may happen. And, that's a little bit, I'd be cautious on how we approach that. Just, if the applicant invests several $1,000s in doing the electrical work, and then I wouldn't want that to stand in the way of the city doing whatever is planned in terms of mitigation or demo on the
Right.
attachment right there next to the garage. And so I think that's, that's something I'm a little concerned about. And as far as, I do have, I think it was already expressed, a little reservation about, what if some restaurant says, hey, that's a great idea. How come I didn't get in on this? It's saying we lease parking places. I'd sure want to bounce that off of the city attorney to make sure that we're not really stepping into something contentious. And, if we get around to doing the actual specifics of the conditional use conditions, there are a few other things think we need to tighten up. Like I think to say the agreement may include is way too weak. It should say it must include. And definitely insurance. I mean, that's in the city ordinance. You have to have insurance if you're operating on city property. So may is a bad word for a conditional use as far as I'm concerned. So with that, I'll wait for more.
Yeah, I think the intent is that the agreement, because planning staff doesn't control what the agreement with the parking department and ultimately the city would say. And so I was trying to kind of list out the things that I knew would be required, or I felt like would be required. But certainly the parking department, I wanted to leave them the latitude to include whatever they wanted and felt was necessary to include. And ultimately city council has to approve that.
Yeah. I just think that, we're here and we're making a recommendation, and we have to be clear in what
Sure.
our expectations are in terms of, there's no way I could vote for this if it tied us into a perpetual obligation. It has to be clearly spelled out that we have a way out.
Right.
Whenever we need it.
Right.
So, with that, Julia?
Yeah, I just have a quick question for staff. If the major conditional use permit is the only tool that we have here, as opposed to a revocable permit that might give a little bit, obviously that's not available because it's not what we're looking at, but a revocable permit, especially in these conditions during this rather unusual time, would allow significant occupation, like Ms. Lowenberg was saying, along the right of way. Is that not something that Manitou does?
Well, we actually looked to see if we could include this food truck in the parklets, the new program that we've started. And it's specific at this point to existing restaurants. Sunwater is not a restaurant. And so it's intended for a little different user. We do have some provisions for revocable permit, but it's not something that that we have very much experience using, and it's frankly not something that we handle. And I don't know, Christine, do you know any more about that? Whether this would even qualify as for something like a revocable permit?
It wouldn't, excuse me, it wouldn't, but where we are able to revoke it and where we're able to control the timeline, of course, comes down to that parking arrangement. And so that agreement there is what is going to mandate that. So what I think would be a reasonable approach on this is that as it coming out of Planning Commission, we put in there that it's a condition that the parking permit and the parking arrangement that's finalized between the city and Sunwater. Actually, it's updated. There's already one in place, but that it would be a condition that it could be for no more than 12 months at a time. And as well, that there would be conditions under which if Hiawatha was redeveloped, then it could be with a 30-day or a 45-day notice provided to them that it's revocable. That's how I would handle it based upon our current code.
Thank you.
Now, possibly we can do something similar to what we did with the incline conditional use, where we have a conditional use and an IGA.
Absolutely.
One
Absolutely.
Yeah,
not
basically,
the other. But we just-
basically, I think you could look at it as the conditional use, it would be in place, but the terms of the use, I suppose you could call it, would be the lease, which would be kind of like the IGA that we had for the incline, or we have for the incline.
Okay. Okay, any more questions before we move on? Okay, then with that, can we bring the applicant into the conversation?
Name
I
and
would-
address.
Sure. Just real quick, if I could, I'd like to add to that, and share with the rest of the group. Alan and I had a great deal of discussion, I felt, about food truck and what defines a food truck. I did a lot of research because we don't have in our municipal zoning code a provision for food trucks. But what I discovered, because I wasn't terribly familiar with this, is that even in Colorado Springs, the definition of a food truck indicates that it is not stationary. It has to move. It cannot be, it's not supposed to, under their license with the city of Colorado Springs, it's not even supposed to pull electrical from a building or water. Now, does that mean it always happens that way? No. But so this is definitely a bit of gray area for us in the city. Right, so we're almost considering it more like a restaurant than a mobile business.
I think there is a brief mention of mobile food carts somewhere in the ordinance, which
Right,
ties it to restaurant operations.
right. Didn't quite fit what they're trying to do. So yeah, so we really had to sort of fit the solution to this unique situation.
Okay.
So go ahead, I'm sorry about that.
Okay, well, with that, the applicant like to state your name and address for the record?
Hi, yeah, I'm Lynn Edinger Harwell. My home address is 2721 West Uinta in Old Colorado City, but I'm also the innkeeper, and I have residences technically at Sun Mountain Center at 328 and 336 El Paso. So I've been around Manitou for a long time.
Okay, well, you have the floor now.
Okay.
You've heard our discussion and you heard the proposal, and
First, let me just say thank you to the planning department. Worked so hard on this, and there have been frustrations. There have been a lot of things happening with this proposal that kind of 11th hour things, and a lot of discussions and a lot of hard work. And I'm thankful. We're happy with that arrangement of going to Hiawatha. Ideally, yeah, we'd love to be in our parking lot. In that, we'll see what the future holds. But we are actually, grateful for the opportunity to operate in Hiawatha. I might be able to answer a few questions for some of you, almost everyone, except I don't think Carrie posted a question at this point, but David and Tip and Alan and Julie all did. And let me say, we were in conversations earlier in the year with the city about, the potential of partnership at Hiawatha in some different ways with Sunwater. That's changed with COVID happening. If in fact, we're happy to negotiate whatever terms would be, agreeable, with both us and the city. As far as insurance, we already have liability insurance. We have food truck insurance. The MAC, the Manitou Art Center, is already on our insurance, liability insurance, no problem to add the city. Again, as Michelle and Christine's pointed out, that adding the electricity, we've got about 45,000 invested in the food truck already. We are technically, it's a truck, it's mobile. It has a generator attached to it. The generator's not big enough, but if we start that generator, you'll have a noise problem. It needs to be replaced. The generator that we need is going to cost us about $10,000 to $12,000. We might be able to get it used for 6 to 8. We are going to buy a generator, but probably not until next year. Which would make us totally mobile without need of plug-in electricity. And many food trucks go to places in Colorado Springs and plug in, trust me. But as far as the future use of Hiawatha, if the reality ever comes to fruition that whether that property is torn down and a new building's put up, or the historical aspects are preserved and some businesses are allowed to come in, such as a food and beverage facility or a green grocer, we would be the first on the list to submit an RFP to be able to do something like that. We already have a biodynamic farm right down the street. We are, again, when you look at the Plan Manitou, we are the epitome of Plan Manitou. When you look at the aspects of health, healing, and well-being, our food is locally sourced. It's, I mean, there's so many things about what we're doing with the truck itself and in relationship to Sunwater that fit Plan Manitou. But if it's a contract that you're afraid of, that you're going to tie the city into a long-term use, we're happy to negotiate that. We have been a partner with the city for a long time and plan to continue that. And in whatever way that looks like. Again, I'm just happy to sit at this table finally, and to be here. We missed our meeting on September 9th. But here we are, and I would really love it for you all to approve this so we can move forward, so the city council can look at this and we can get this truck back up. We have 5 people that we had to lay off. 3 of these are Manitou residents that are out of a job right now, that are struggling to pay their rent, their bills, and the longer that truck sits dormant, the longer those folks are going to have problems with their bills and their finances, and we need to get that back. Let alone revenue, which will help our business hopefully succeed. We can keep these folks going in Manitou Springs, which is, I think, important to all of us on that side. So I don't know if I've answered some of those questions. I know you all had little questions about that, and we're here, we're at the table. We want to negotiate, we want to talk about it, and we would love to be there very soon.
Any questions for the applicant? Julia?
I would like to ask the applicant if he has any issues with anything that staff recommended, numbers 1 through 4.
Well, no, not really. Again, ideally, we'd love to be on our own property, but we're very thankful for this alternative and to be able to stay so close to where we are and to operate in Manitou and be part of the community. I think we add a lot. So to answer your question, no, we don't have a problem. We don't have any issues with what's been proposed.
Great, thank you.
David?
If I heard you correctly, Lynn, your ideal timeline is as soon as possible. But do we have specific dates? And I don't know, maybe this is a question for Michelle and Christine, when this ideally goes before council and or the parking department and whoever else has to be involved?
November 3rd.
Okay.
That's the council meeting. And I would hope that at least some aspects, or if not a complete details on their lease agreement, could be worked out with the parking department, at least some, some aspects of that might be, critical to council, and certainly address any conditions that you all might put on, could be worked out before that, so at least could be reported on at the meeting.
And Lynn, that is acceptable to you, that timeline?
It's apparently going to have to be. I had a 45-minute conversation with the mayor today, and we had looked at another timeline that, again, was reported to me that was changed. There was, because of some snafus that happened with the September 9th meeting and, what was going on, they were going to try to hear council next week on the 20th. That's not going to work, as I understand. It sounded as if the mayor might go back and try to bat some things, for us, but it's, again, not a favoritism thing. This is a thing of, trying to get a business back up. But I don't think that's going to happen. So, if November 3rd is what it is, then that's going to be what it is. And yeah, it's not the ideal situation for us, but yes, we're fine with that.
Well, I do hear the urgency of,
Yeah, based on that prior timeline that was discussed, we did make a request that had been discussed previously, and it was unable to be accommodated. If there is an opportunity for that to change, we'll certainly let you know. Unfortunately, tomorrow we do have to mail out the notices and begin posting properties so that we can meet public notice requirements. And so, yeah, so we're at the 11th hour, if you will, in terms of any meeting changes.
So, Lynn, from what I hear you saying, your preference would be to stay on your property.
Well, sure. But, you know, I mean, the planning department brings up good, you know, again, I kind of took a little issue, where we asked someone to pull off the lot. We've been, you know, I mean, we've operated the truck for like 6 weeks, and not to my knowledge, we never asked anyone to pull out of the parking spaces, and it worked. So I don't know what happened with that, but.
It was me, Lynn, it was
okay,
me.
okay.
I was with the chief of police, and we
Oh.
pulled in an unmarked vehicle and were asked to leave the lot.
That-
Okay, I guess looking at.
Sorry about that.
No, it's okay. It was totally fine. I still bought lunch. It was fine.
No, I'm sorry. I don't know if I answered the question, but yeah, it's, you know, we, you know, we've looked at the Hiawatha property for a long time, and, you know, with COVID and the pandemic, it's limited a lot of things that we could do, you know, financially, you know, existing building, new building. But, you know, as we look at trying to just succeed and be a business, to stay in business, you know, with our capacities reduced, that food truck really helps our overall financial picture. It puts us into the black. We're not in the black yet by any means, as many businesses are. You know, but you know, again, the future of Hiawatha is important to us. The continuity of what buildings look like there, what that whole corner looks like along Memorial Park, and we've got a beautiful building. We'd love to see, you know, similar type structures in that property at Hiawatha. And if we can help with that, whether it's in some type of, you know, relationship with the city, or if it's another business, you know, if an opportunity comes up for a restaurant, as I said, or a greengrocer, or some type of facility, you know, we'd want to be considered for that also. So, you know, I don't think we're looking at a situation where you're tied into the Tava food truck forever, that we're going to, you know, argue the point that we have a lifelong contract.
Okay. Anything else before we move on? Okay. With that, I'll open the public hearing. If anybody in the audience would like to address this, raise your hand. Okay, I don't see any hands going up. I'll give it a minute or two. Okay, I guess we'll close the public hearing and we can discuss a little bit. To start, I gotta say, you know, when I first heard about this, it sounded like a good idea. And the more I think about it and the complexity of it, I almost feel like I'd rather keep the food truck in the parking lot and on the property and try to address a temporary parking variance or something. But that's just my thinking. Carrie?
Yeah, I was going to ask, how many parking spaces could you put, or, you know, nose to nose along the spot where you're going to be putting in the food truck, and just make those additional parking spaces for, and like you say, offer additional spaces to Sunwater to lease and leave their truck where it is. Because what we were worried about with the truck where it is the loss of spaces for their customers parking in public property. So if you just had them lease a couple more spots and left their truck where it is,
Yeah.
Well, at this point, the parking department has no plans for striping that area for parking. They want to be able to access the garage, which the food truck would still let them if there was a need to get in there. You know, they could either walk around behind it, or if the food truck needed to pull out of that space for, you know, to allow somebody to open the garage, get something out or whatever. But they don't have any plans to put parking there. And there may be other physical constraints I don't know about. And frankly, from a staff standpoint, I don't know that we would recommend allowing the food truck to take up half of the on-site parking. I don't think that that is a good scenario for all the reasons that I've stated in the staff report. And, you know, I don't think it's actually as good for the business to use half their parking and potentially the whole parking lot, you know, because of issues with conflicts with pedestrians and cars and all that kind of stuff. I just don't think it's a good idea. Staff doesn't believe it's a good idea. And so that's why we propose this alternative. And, you know, a lease on the property, you know, that allows for the food truck is going to take precedence, and is, you know, the conditional use is subject to the terms of a lease. And, you know, certainly there could be a condition added to that. But, you know, yeah, you know, ultimately the commission can do and make the recommendation it wants. But staff, other than the evaluation that we've given you, has not written the report to put the parking at Sunwater. It's written to evaluate really more fully the parking on Hiawatha, or the food truck on Hiawatha.
Tip?
Yeah, so I really appreciate, I think the staff did a very good job, and I really appreciate what you said, Lynn, in responding. I think that given the circumstances that we find ourselves in, that this, in a way, it's kind of a compromise or an alternative position does make a lot of sense. And I think it does from a planning standpoint for the city of Manitou as well, that to start to get people habituated to thinking about the Hiawatha property in a multiplicity of purposes, I think would be a good thing. And I really appreciate the applicant saying that it's sort of visionary, that if we could get that property to help to complete the park, to bring in the to have it developed in a way that meets parking and needs and transportation needs, but also provides other services that would be needed, but in a very aesthetically pleasing and an economically viable way. I think that that's all to the good. I do think that it's incumbent on us to protect the city's interest, and especially at a time where the city, as every private and public entity is under financial distress. Then I do think that we could, because I hear what you're saying, Alan, I think that we have to make sure that we protect the city's interest at the same time. And I think that the applicant is okay with that. That's what I heard him saying. So I could imagine approving this plan, but to change, as you said, Alan, the may to must, and it's not limited to that, but those must happen. Secondly, that all of the expenses, such as moving the toilets if they need to be moved, putting in the barriers, if already the electricity is being considered, but we could stipulate that any of those kinds of things, the city should not be subsidizing financially a private business. I don't think that's appropriate. So if we stipulated that they must bear the brunt for all of these kinds of requirements, that would be the second thing. And then I think to be more explicit about the limited liability of the city in permitting this use going forward, that it would be on a contractual basis. And as Christine said, and Michelle said, that's, I guess, already understood, but there's no reason not to underscore it. and to accentuate it and say, we just want to make clear that this is something that can be a contract, a relationship that could be ended at the end of a year, or depending, I can't remember your word, I think it was Christine who said that, depending if something comes up that that means that that space needs to be made available. So I think that if we had those three changes, then I feel that the city's interest would be protected. I think that the food truck there, I think, walking there all the time, I think the food truck there is better than on their property, not only in terms of parking here and there, but I think it will be really good. There are so many people parking now in Hiawatha, and then they go over to take the bus or whatnot, to afford them the possibility to think about that as a place that is multi-purpose. To my mind, that would be a good. And so I do support it with the changes to the recommendations that I put forward. That's my thinking right now.
Any other thoughts? Carrie?
I just have a question on the liability issues associated with the truck being on city property and the potentially increase in liability. Somebody leaving the food truck from the barrier, steps in front of a car. I mean, does the food truck itself become, a sort of attractive nuisance in a parking lot situation? And how do we accommodate the potentially increased liability from that?
Excellent question. Michelle, if it's okay, I'd like to address this one. So as the city has been exploring this parklet concept on Manitou Avenue, we had to do a pretty extensive exercise looking into that. And what forced us actually to look at it in that way had to do with a CDOT grant application that we were preparing. Under this grant application, we were seeking funds that would provide businesses throughout the city access to Jersey barriers, so some sort of protection barrier. So as we were going through this process, CDOT posed to us, as we were looking at securing permits and things like that, they posed to us a number of questions about our insurance, and we had to investigate exactly that. At the end of it, it was determined that our insurance does sufficiently cover that, but the business must have us on as an endorsement, and there were some requirements there as well. So we have gone through that exercise coincidentally alongside this. And that's why, I mentioned earlier, because we're looking at these outdoor dining areas, it really opened up some ideas and thoughts on how they could operate. Did that answer your question?
Yeah. I just, from a liability issue, it does seem like, bringing more people into walking around a parking lot. Right.
And it would be located in a place where people, especially incliners. So incliners are directed to park there. We want them to park there, and then we want them to take the shuttle up to the incline. We would love it if they take it up to the COG as well, but we're pushing them there. And so from a traffic flow perspective, we did go down and look at this. They would come off of a shuttle or bus, and that is right there. So they would not be substantially walking through the parking lot, because we were concerned about that as well. Are we creating an attractive nuisance that could create some additional problems that we're not anticipating?
Thank you.
You bet.
David?
It seems to me that given the dramatic impacts of the coronavirus situation, that the guiding principle here is that it's incumbent on the city to do whatever it can to support businesses, and certainly a long time and very high quality business like Sunwater. And I applaud the planning department, and in your typical fashion, working so closely with the applicant to figure out a way to make this happen. Now, it's clear that the Planning Commission should not do anything that would compromise the city's position, but it seems to me that devolves to the agreement that the parking department would have, and/or I don't know if the city attorney gets involved with this or not. I'm happy with the food truck in either location. I don't think the amount of traffic on El Paso is an issue. I would disagree with staff on that. I drive past Sunwater several times a week. It's very slow, and I don't think that's a big issue. But at this point, that's a detail. And I quite like Tip's point about this pointing the way toward potential future multiple use of Hiawatha Gardens.
Okay. Any other thoughts? Actions? Yeah, I was trying to find the wording that we used in the incline, but we're kind of doing it in reverse. You know, with the incline, we had the IGA sort of reference back to the conditional use. Somehow we need to state a condition here that says this conditional use is dependent upon okay, looks like Michelle has some words here.
I think I have some wording. You can tell me. So condition number 1 would be a revised. The last sentence before the bullets would say the agreement shall include, but is not limited to, and then have the bullets. And then I would add another bullet that said shall be, no longer than 12-month term with 30 to 60-day cancellation provisions. So that addresses, I think, some of the questions or concerns. Then I would add another condition that said, this major conditional use shall be subject to and dependent on the terms and the conditions of the revocable lease for the food truck. So we've noted, the term and that they'd need a 30 to 60-day revocation process. Or provision, and then we're saying that conditional use is based on there being, this lease in place, and that really is what drives the provisions for the use of the property.
Okay, Tip?
That sounds good to me. And Michelle, if you could help with the phrasing for something about the expenses to be borne by the applicant, then I would be pretty much ready to make a motion.
Sure.
And I mean, there can be more discussion, obviously, with a motion, but that's where I would be heading.
So the last bullet of number 1 says to include in the lease an agreement on any improvements such as potential electrical outlets required for food truck operation. So we could certainly say the agreement will provide for the applicant
to pay for cost associated with
Any required improvements?
What's that?
Any required improvements?
Yeah, and you can even say such as the movement of the toilets, the placement of the barriers, or attractive barriers, and electrical needs or something like that, just as examples of the kinds of things that must be borne by the applicant.
Yep. And I can read that back anytime, hopefully read that back anytime you all need me to.
Okay, any other discussion?
I'm trying to scroll through the recommendation, and we already have in there that they're adding us as on their insurance.
That's the first bullet under item number 1.
Okay.
Yeah.
Additional insured, yeah.
Yeah, and that's in our city code that anything that private parties do on city land, they have to have liability
Absolutely.
coverage.
Do we ask them for an amount, a dollar amount of the liability?
I don't think.
No, we generally will consult with the city attorney, and he'll tell us based on the use proposed or some sort of, he'll give us an amount is what usually happens.
Okay. Any other questions? So we're
I
waiting.
could real quick, just let you know, their current liability policy is $2 million. So it would sufficiently meet any needs the city has.
Really?
Yeah.
My liability, my insurance agent says I need 2 million and I don't do anything.
I've got 3 million.
Oh, wow. Yeah, most of the ones I've ever seen are $1 million, that what we've required of other people doing things that they have to make us additional insured. So I would think 2 million's sufficient.
It's sufficient.
Yep.
You two must be dangerous. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, we've got too much wealth, and they say if
Assets.
you run over someone, then they're going to go after anything you have.
I know.
I'm sure mine is $10.
But you have that dog, the show dog.
You have Nacho.
Yeah, right. So I think I'm ready to make a motion that we recommend approval of, I'm looking for the number, Makeup 2003 with all of the staff's findings or recommendations with the changes that Michelle has enumerated. The additional requirements in that first bullet, the change of language to must, and the language that would require, would stipulate that the agreement could come to an end under the circumstances that she set out.
Okay, do you want to read it back, Michelle, or?
Sure, you want me to go through the conditions?
Yeah, and then we'll get a second.
Okay, so number one, we would change in the last sentence before the bullets, the agreement shall include but is not limited to. And then we would add a bullet that said no longer than 12-month term with a 30 to 60 day cancellation provisions. And then we would, the bullet that talks about the agreement shall include provisions for the applicant being responsible for costs. It's the last bullet, actually, it's on the top of page 7. It says the agreement will provide for the applicant to pay for costs of any improvements such as potential electrical outlets, moving the porta potties, and installation of barriers required for food truck operation. And then I would suggest adding a condition that said this major conditional use permit shall be subject to the terms and conditions of the revocable lease for the food truck.
Great, so I move that.
Okay, is there a second? Okay, Julia seconds, and
Second. Motion, Michelle, the motion.
okay. And any more discussion? And let's vote by raising our hands if we're in favor. Okay, so that's unanimous.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, that was longer than anticipated. So moving on, next, and actually when I never called out the parking variance that we should have, it was withdrawn, so I guess it doesn't really exist. Okay. And item 4, variance 2014, rear yard setback 11.1 where 15 is required, 44 Grant Avenue, Kylie and Micah Myers applicants.
So the applicants are requesting approval of an 11-foot.
Okay, Julia, did you have a?
I guess I needed to ask for, I know that Michelle is ready to read the staff report and this is not an appropriate time, but with the emails coming in, I was under the impression that maybe this wasn't necessary. We might not have all the information and I wasn't sure if this was an item that was more appropriate for postponement or if the staff can sufficiently accommodate the information that has come in at the last, I guess I would say the last hour.
I
So,
echo that question.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. I'm at the point, like I went and looked at the property and I tried to make sense. And since then I've gotten a bunch of documents and it's hard for me to, without going and looking at it again, to sort of put all the pieces together. So I'm kind of at a crossroads there. Tip?
I also think that it makes sense to postpone, given that there are really fundamental issues that are being addressed at the someone used 11th hour at the last, and we depend very heavily on the staff's report. We all do our homework reading the material. We think about it. I mean, that's pretty clear, and I don't feel. I just don't like making these kinds of decisions on the like on the spur of the moment. I think that I would like to hear the more digested reflections of the staff, and then to have all of the materials before us to think about very seriously before we deliberate. That would just be my point of view too.
Yeah, and I feel like if there's a geotechnical report that's been referenced, we should be able to see it if we're going to rely on that information. And so
the geohazards, the tier 1 geohazards did come in today. However, I knew that there was no way that, I mean, I haven't had a chance to look at it. So I knew there was no way that you all were going to be able to do that before the meeting. So that has not yet been forwarded to you. I have briefly reviewed the letter that was submitted to provide more justification, and on that, brief review, it looks like the applicant has provided a lot more information and potentially some good justification. But I've not updated the staff report, and I've not reviewed or really incorporated any of the other information that came out today. What my recommendation was going to be, if you continue, if you have the hearing, is that basically I would provide the background that's in the staff report, but then the applicant would need to present the information that has been submitted in the last couple of days, because it's just not something that staff has been able to update the report. So I don't want to advocate for postponement or not. It's what you all are comfortable with. I'm sure that, I believe that by the end of a hearing, you probably would have a good understanding. But like I said, it's not something where staff's been able to go in and update the report. And Christine, do you have any more?
Yeah, this is one where it is a potentially very straightforward variance request. It is not complicated. There was a challenge in terms of meeting this timeline. I did share with the property owners that any information that they, any information that they sent in response to this, we would forward on to the commissioners as it was received. And that if we did move forward with the hearing tonight, that you would, they could advocate this and state their position to you. So it's certainly your decision as planning commissioners on how you want to move forward with this.
David?
Well, I'm prepared to move that we postpone it. However, because it's on the agenda and the applicant is here, I think they ought to be given a chance to respond to the possibility of a delay. Planning Commission is, a month at a time. So.
Yeah, I feel like if we start the hearing, we're going to have to go through it. And I feel like I'm going to have a difficult time making a fair decision without digesting the information. And I'm a person who reads and assimilates. I'm not on the fly as efficient. So for fairness to the applicant, I would be more in favor of postponing.
Well, that makes sense.
So other thoughts? Julia?
Alan, I concur with your opinion there about, well, I concur with your choice. I guess my question to staff is the concern and the hesitation with schedule because there'll have to be a new notice, and the schedule, I'm sure it's inconvenient, but so is making a decision the last minute.
Staff doesn't have an issue with providing new notice. That's really not the concern. I know that the applicant, I think, is, you know, they want to get going with their garage, and that.
Yeah, there were some personal reasons. You know, they had begun design work and didn't know, you know, not unlike our applicant before, didn't quite know and understand what was involved in terms of pulling permits, that there would be a variance request, you know, and as you can see from the staff report, there's been extensive conversation about how to move forward on this. The applicant is departing the country at the first of the year. And so there was a desire to move forward as quickly as possible, and staff was trying to help them in that and see what we could do to make that happen. So that's where I think, you know, if you sense any hesitation, that's where it was from us, that, you know, we have been trying to help them move forward in this process so that they you know, they've got some needs. But having said that, I also understand that there was a substantial amount of information that came in today. As I was driving from the office here, Michelle asked me if I had seen one of the documents that came in late this afternoon, and you know, and I was like, no, I haven't even been able to be back on I've gone from one meeting to the car to come home and to get ready for this, and so you know, I can appreciate that you as commissioners haven't had the opportunity to look at that either.
Tip?
You know, it's clear and it's very understandable that applicants would want to move more expeditiously on something. I think that if we want to take our jobs really seriously, I mean, you know, for me, I have a day job and we meet at 6 o'clock, and to get things 30 minutes before, and as Michelle said, that there are some documents that she has that we don't even have. And I think that if we're going to feel that the process has integrity and we're taking it seriously, to my mind, we should be afforded the time as well as opportunity to process the material in a, you know, with some time ahead. To me, this it's not a very good idea. I would move to postpone this to next month, and that still gives a little bit of time, but I think that that's, to my mind, that's in the interest of the process, and that the process should be, the integrity of the process should be defended.
Okay. Is that
I
a
second that motion.
Okay. And all in favor, raise their hands in postponing. Okay. So this will be on the November 10th, I assume. 11th. November 11th.
November 11th, yeah.
Yeah, so I expect at that point, I mean, it looks like a great deal of material has come in and they've been able to fill out, you know, put some flesh on the bones of what was there. So I would expect that that'll be a complete application and you will have sufficient time to review it then.
Absolutely, and we'll do a revised staff report with a revised recommendation.
Okay. Great. Okay, next item is notice of council action and updates.
So the final plat for the Beckers Lane townhomes has not actually gone before council yet. There's been some delays with Mr. Bishop putting together some of the you know, information that's required before it went to council, and getting everything worked out regarding that. So he is at this point scheduled for the November 3rd city council meeting. And it looks like we've got, I've been going through today to track and make sure I can check off all the items that were required before he goes to council. And I think I've got them all. Maybe there's one, but there's time before that November 3rd meeting to get in it. So I think he's in good shape for that meeting. And hopefully that will bring that application to a close, and then he can start closing on some of the units. So we don't yet have that final action for you all.
Okay. Anything else before we adjourn?
I don't have anything.
I just want to add on to that real quick, just for informational purposes for all of you. With regard to that property, there has been, as you noted, last month we had, during the public hearing, at least one individual who had concerns about public notice, and was there sufficient public notice. Since then, I want you to know that I have spent some time with the city attorney, reviewed the process. We identified that sufficient notice was provided throughout the process. Given that city council is the final hearing for this, and there will be a solid 10 days, almost 2 weeks of notice in terms of mailings that the city will conduct on behalf of the applicant, as well as the public postings, and then in the newspaper. There will be sufficient opportunities so that anyone who might indicate that they suffered some sort of harm by not having sufficient notice, there's an opportunity to cure that. So I did want to address that and follow up on that, and let you know that that has been followed up on.
Okay. Anything else? Then let's adjourn the meeting.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Thank you.